What's up guys, I'm Steve the Graphics Guy. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. If you're returning, I appreciate you coming back. Today, I'm going over some quick tips on installing wall film on drywall, specifically what to do in corners when you have extra bleed, and also going around raised objects. And we'll see if we can come up with some other ones on the fly. So I created this wall prop here in the office, got it mounted up to some pallet rack, and the reason I made this is because one, I can always learn something new and always want to try different techniques and see what works best in a controlled environment like my office instead of in the field where I'm working with materials that cannot easily be replaced. And some of the things I work on, as I mentioned, and I'm going to show you, is dealing with corners. So I made an inside corner, actually on both sides. I guess it would be cool to add outside corner too, which could easily be done. So maybe that's for another time. Another thing I did was add cove base. This is specific to one of my customers, and they had a ton of extra on one of the jobs, and I said, you know what, I could use that. So that's something that we want to make sure we're practicing on, getting our film right up to it, not cutting it short and not going over it or cutting into it. So that's something to practice. And then I have some different objects too, which I'm going to get into. Like a fire pull station, and we run into these a lot, and fire strobes as well. That's another prop I need to get, but along the same lines. And those objects typically cannot be removed without having the fire guys there or calling the 911 center and making sure the alarm's on test mode, and it's a whole disaster. So if the building's not under construction, those things really can't move. So those are just a couple things, and yeah, so that's why I built it. I want to be able to train my employees with it and myself, and be able to show you guys what I have going on, and hopefully it helps you with some tips and tricks to where you can do a more quality install next time you're in the field doing wall murals. So, all right, now we'll jump into it. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do, which I'll bring you closer to show you some detail, but we're just gonna start with a piece of film and say that we started up here. That's usually the amount of bleed I have, about 3 inches or so. So I'm squeegeeing that down. And once I get to this point where I'm getting within an inch or so of the cove base, I'm gonna make sure I'm lifting that material up off of the cove base. This specific cove base and many others, the film sticks to very easily and very well. So you want to keep the film off of there so you can get it down as far as you can, touching, without bridging it and having to like stretch it in there, because that's not what we want. So I'm gonna lift it up, continue my squeegeeing, and then you'll feel it start to get connected. And I might even just lift it up a tiny bit off of there and go with the hard part of my squeegee instead of the soft, because it's obviously the squeegee is a little more rounded on this side with the buffer, and it's very sharp on the side without the buffer. So I'm gonna get it down there nice and close, and then I'll show you what I'm gonna do here. I said this in my what's in my tool belt video, is that I always carry a random squeegee, not so random, but a Teflon coated one that is meant for cutting. And you'll see this one is pretty beat up, the corners are pretty chomped, and that's because I use this only when I'm cutting around edges, usually on glass, but walls as well. So I just snapped a fresh blade, and I'm gonna take, I usually work from right to left because I'm right-handed and I want to control my knife with that hand. So I'm going to put my squeegee right against the wall, tighten the corner. I'm going to start my knife and just slow and steady right across. Carefully peel that back, get that out of the way, and then seal that down nice and tight. So you'll see from the top, it does roll over the edge a little bit. If I really hammer down on my squeegee, I could probably get it down there a little bit more. But that's pretty much what it looks like. We don't want it to come up short. You know, even if it's sticking over the edge just a tiny bit, the width of the squeegee, I think having a uniform line is much better than not. And sometimes I see guys that, you know, they just squeegee, they just do that. And while that is nice and fast, you could see it's not perfect. Like there is some white gaps, kind of hard to see probably, but that's certainly the quick and easy way, and that works for a lot of people. But for me, I like to make sure it's a little more perfect, a little more calculated than just running your blade, because, you know, at some point you could catch the cove base, you could go off, you could come down, you could scratch it. When I have the squeegee up there and I'm pressing into it, that squeegee is just guiding that knife perfectly. And that's why I have this sacrificial squeegee that I don't use for applying ever, because it does have a bunch of cuts in it, because it's holding my blade. And so that's that. I guess the only other thing, corner wise or cove base wise, would be when you're in a corner, and that is a slightly difficult thing. So let's go for it. There are cases where I just did one 2 days ago where you have a flat surface, you have a bump out, and then the wall continues. And not all printers are created equal in the way that they provide panels for that specific situation. Some people don't see that as anything. They just take all the measurements, print it as a flat wall, and you get what you get, and you don't throw a fit. But panel layout, when dealing with bump outs, is kind of critical. And so if they don't pay attention to that, it makes these corners very difficult. So, which we'll get into corners here shortly. The main part of corners, actually. But so right now I'm just focusing on this wall, getting that down, and I'm going to lift it, make sure it's into that corner, flat across there. And then I'm going to work on just the corner itself, which is a little difficult with squeegees that have rounded corners. Might try with this one, but that's not great either. I'm going to adjust my cut a little bit so that I'm didn't help. So that I'm accounting for that extra material in the corner. So that's not terrible. Let me grab another squeegee that's a little bit sharper and show you what I can do with that. Alright, this is an awesome tool. This one was from Avery Dennison, and it's a very tiny kind of squeegee. It's a little pusher on that side, whatever you want to call that. That's something that can certainly help you get into the corners. There's a soft and a hard version. This is the harder version, it's the blue. The red one is the softer version. And I'm going to clean that up just a tiny bit, make it nice and symmetrical there, which it's hard to get out. But we're trying. Oh man. There we go. Alright, so you could see that wasn't even perfect in the corner, but corners are difficult. So we'll go over some other ways that you can do that. And we'll just start with the first one, and we'll just kind of backtrack a little bit here on this one. So once you get into that corner, I would call this the hotel corner technique, and let's say so let's say this is the wall you started on over here, and then we're going to go over to this wall. If I didn't apply all this, I just got it around the corner, that's just kind of loose, I would grab a squeegee with a buffer. This one's kind of thick, but it'll work for this purpose. And I would cut that down. So then you have a little bit of overlap onto this wall. Then with this piece, you then overlap that. You can continue with your squeegeeing. You can go do your cut down there. And that does show a little underlap underneath, but does give you a perfect edge in the corner and make it a little bit easier to wrap around. And why that might have to be done in some cases is because corners are usually not perfectly square, and if they're not, you know, once you get to the corner you might be able to get it flat for an inch or whatever amount, but if you have 40 more inches of material, getting that all to lay flat and be plumb at the end, if you have multiple panels afterwards, is going to be extremely difficult. So sometimes it's required that you would have to split it in the corner, which is obviously the best place, and with that you might have some misalignment, and that's okay, because I mean obviously you want to minimize that, but at some point it has to happen, otherwise it's going to mess up all the other panels down the road. And so that's just what has to be done. I had to do that on a job just a few days ago, and it's just a product of the corners not being perfect and the panels not being produced in a way that they should have been, because I was working for another vendor, and that just is what it is. So if next time you're in a hotel, check out the corners. I can guarantee you that they look like this. They were cut in the corners. One of the panels was slightly overlapped, and it continues. And I bet you the pattern probably doesn't line up perfectly. So check it out. I learned that from a hotel. I was not taught that, but I picked it up from seeing it so many times that that's what you have to do sometimes. All right, so that is the cove base, and part of this uncomfortable training, I elevated this a little bit, but part of this training is that you need to understand that you're going to be tucked down into the ground, into a corner. You're going to have shadows, and you just got to work through all that. So that's part of the prop as well. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to handle the corners even if you're not wrapping around the corners. So I'm just going to cut a piece here and show you something on the table that I do a lot. Move some of this junk. All right. So let me raise you up here. So here's my film. We're working with some 3M Control Tech today. This was extra from a job, and just solid color that I was just working with. But what I do is I figure out how much bleed I have, and normally the printer will tell you that, or if you produced it yourself, you would know that. My standard is 3 inches in every direction, so an extra 6 inches total in width and height. And so what I would do is measure out the 3 inches. 3M has these little hash marks on the back, so you could just follow a line at that point. And this cutter is from Yellow Tools. This is, I think, the Bodyguard Knife Pro or something like that. There's a couple different ones. This one just has a holder with extra blades in it. And what this does is slide between the adhesive layer and the liner, and allows you to just cut the liner without cutting the adhesive. So I'm going to slide that in. It's a little squeaky. And now I've created this easy hinge to where, let me spin you around, to where now I can put this into the corner, and if I'm working on this flat part here, the liner can just continue to go down without fighting the corner. Does that make sense? So if this was all one, you'd kind of be bridging this corner. You'd be fighting taking the liner off. You'd be wrinkling this entire corner, which then you'd have to heat and get that out. And it just makes it much harder. If you just take 3 seconds, and I don't know how much that cutter was, we'll just say $60, and do that, it'll save you a ton of time in the long run. So another thing I do with that cutter, which I might as well show you now, is I'll cut about 1 inch out, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever it is, into those 2 lines. right there. And that's going to help me get started. So I will, you know, get up onto the wall. I'll usually fold over that corner, pull that down, and obviously I would, you know, set up my laser line so this is on there, and I would use a piece of tape on this side and maybe this bottom edge too to make sure it stays straight. But I'd release that and grab my squeegee and just follow that up and then over, and now this whole thing is locked in, not going anywhere. I then proceed with the top. The bottom. And at this point, I usually like to bust out a bigger squeegee. And you know, if this is a huge panel, you're going left to right. For this purpose, I'm just gonna go straight down. And now we have the corner. So see how easy it was to pull that liner? I didn't have to fight in the corner. I just pulled it down, here it is. Now I have this whole corner, which isn't sticking to anything else because it's still protected by the liner. So I could do this entire flat section, and then I can come back to this when I'm ready. So I'm gonna peel the liner now that I'm ready. Just like when I was doing the cove base at the bottom, I'm keeping this film off the corner of the wall. Another pro tip, which I can show you, I might as well show you now, is, I don't do this all the time, but if you're at an install and you know that you don't want to damage, maybe there's wallpaper on this wall or something, and you're doing a mural, adhesive mural on this wall, it may be necessary to protect whatever that surface is. Maybe it's aluminum, maybe it's wallpaper, maybe it's wood, who knows what it is. But it's a lot of times a good idea to protect that surface, because this film, depending on what you're using, can stick to this and cause an issue with whatever materials over here. So another part of that is, even if it's just painted drywall, it could mess it up depending on the film you're using. Like I said, this is 3M's Control Tack. It is very sticky right off the bat. And the problem with that is a lot of painters or preppers, drywall guys, they don't pay as much attention in the corners. They don't always get all the dust free and clear before they do their primer. And maybe between their sanding and their coats, they might not wipe the corners free of all that before they paint it again. And so that creates an adhesion issue with the paint to the primer to the drywall. And so now if you stick this in there, even just to the corner, you cut it and you remove this, that can easily pull up paint. I've done it many times, and it just creates an issue for you, creates an issue for the painter, the general contractor. I carry paintbrushes with me and I say, do you have the paint? Let me touch this up real quick. That's a great way to go around it, but if you could avoid it from the beginning, that's even better. So keeping this off the wall, that wasn't a good technique there. And we're just gonna seal that down. You don't have to go any further than that, because like I said, you don't want to mess up what else is going on there. But that gets you all the way into the corner. And then just like before, I'm gonna snap a blade so that I know it's nice and sharp. I'm gonna get my squeegee, start at the top. Boop. Got my squeegee in there. I'm still using my right hand because that's what I'm most comfortable with the blade. So I'm gonna cross arms, advanced technique, and then making sure I'm not cutting really into the wall, but enough to cut through the film. Follow it through all the way. I'm gonna seal that down. And then this removal is something I'm gonna do slowly, because if for some reason I didn't cut through all the way, it would mess up the film that is attached to the wall, and we don't want that. So that looks really good. Once the film is away, I'm gonna squeegee that down one more time, remove my tape, and you can see, hopefully, what that looks like. And it looks really good. So if this was a different color accent wall, I know it's kind of hard to see with this color, but that would be a nice flush cut there. So that is something you should be happy with. All right, the next one that I was going to show you is going to be the pull station, and for that we're going to put that right here. They're never in a place where you want them to be, so unless of course you're in a fire, then they'll be somewhere you want them to be, because you'll be able to find them easily. But this would actually never be, well, compared to the cove base, that's probably where it would be, only because this wall is elevated, it seems high. So let's say this is our panel, and I'm gonna stand on this because that also adds to the fun of practicing wall graphics, because at some point you always have to stand on a ladder. So say I already did a panel, this is my second panel. This is how I would typically set the second panel. The only difference is that I would normally have one on the bottom left here to keep it straight, but since this raised object is so high, I can't do this one because it's going to throw off this whole corner. So what I would do is hold this tight to the object, make sure this left edge is perfectly straight there with my laser line or level, whatever I'm using, and that's going to have to be it. So pretend my ceiling is right up here. I'm going to release some liner, use my snitty so I'm not cutting the wall or anything, and then I'm going to squeegee that. From there, I can remove my tape. I pick up on both sides, grab the liner, and pull it out. When I know I have an object coming, which it should not be a surprise, I don't go too far down the wall. So I will pull liner so that I can get to the object, and now I'm standing below it, but it does feel like I put even too much on. So this first method, I leave 18, 20 inches, whatever, not applied to the wall. At this point, I'm using my 60-degree blades, a little more accurate and precise. I'm going to trace the object with my finger. and just running my blade right along the edge of it. Going nice and slow. I'm going to change my body position. I'm going to cut right around the object, and you'll see that it's already started to go back around, which is perfect. It's exactly what we want. So let me see. Bring you closer. All right, so now you can see a little bit better. And there's something I didn't do on this, which I'll tell you shortly, that would have made this a little bit easier. But now I can gently walk this back. I'm going to start squeegeeing from the top now. And I'm pulling left and I'm pulling right as I go down. Now, this box that's behind, that the pull station is mounted to, actually has square corners, even though these corners are rounded. So I'm going to very gently cut from the indent of the square corner towards the front of the box where the rounded corner is. I'm going to lift that edge up a little bit so it releases. And with my fingers, I'm just going to start to walk that back a little bit. I'm going to switch to a smaller squeegee. I'm still pushing left. I'm pushing right. And at some point, I'm going to walk it straight down to the bottom of the box. As soon as I do that, I'm not even going to touch the sides yet. I'm going to go down. I'm still pulling to the right. And then I'm going to tuck that in right there. Over on the left, doing the same thing. I'm pulling left. I'm going to tuck. The reason I'm going out to both sides, I don't want to be pushing in because that's going to create a pucker of material at the bottom of this object, and then we're not going to be able to get rid of it very easily. So whenever you're going around an object, you want to pull the film to both the left side, the right side. So then by the time you get to the bottom, you can go right around it and then work the material back up a little bit. And even then, sometimes you might still get a little bit of material that you need to play with, but there was just like a little crease there. So then you can go back up and sometimes there will be enough material that, well, there should basically be enough material that it can go under the box. In the case of the top, there was going to be a little bit of excess, which is a good thing. We can cut that out. and then squeegee that down. So you can see there's just a little, maybe you could see, it's just a little smiley face there of material, but that goes away as soon as you pull some tension from both sides. And that wasn't even like pulling, that was just gently telling it, hey, we got to get rid of you, both sides. And now it's pretty much gone. You're flat now, you can continue on, and you're good. This obviously would come off. And you still want to be very careful. If this was an active system, you want to make sure that you're not obviously pulling that, sounding an alarm. You will create mayhem. You don't want to do that. So that's the object. And if you have any like little areas on the corners that need a little bit of heat to kind of settle them down, you could do that. Hit it with the hard part of your squeegee, get it tucked in there. But that is what it looks like. So that's that. The tip that I didn't show you, similar to the sidewall, which I would always do for one of these. The face of this is plastic, but this metal box, there's the answer, is metal. So what I would do is get your painter's tape. I would trace the outline of the box, leaving just a tiny bit. I would cover the whole face of this too. Get it down nice and tight. And that's going to reduce the surface tension, surface energy, tension, same thing. So that the vinyl could just fly right back into there with ease. Sometimes it could get stuck on the metal. That would make it more difficult to work with, so it's best to reduce the surface energy with the tape. And that's that. Those are the tips and tricks I have for you today. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. We are getting close to 500 followers, which is a big milestone for me, and I'm super excited. I appreciate you guys watching. I thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.